Okay, before I start this video, we're going to take some time to sit together in silence. And I like to close my eyes to do that, and you could do whatever makes you feel good. I was gonna do something a little bit different on this video, but I think I'm gonna take a turn here. I actually want to talk about ego death because that just came through really strong. And I want to talk about what that is from a time-bound perspective and also from the perspective of timelessness or non-duality. Ego death is a thing. It is real. It is a process that people go through on a physiological, psychological level. So what it is it's the reorientation of perception. And it's also the deconstruction of the personal identity or the personality. So it's those two things. And one of the core, it's a very alchemical process because what you have is awareness pushing out into the body and through the body. That's why we call it embodiment or integration. Okay. We have awakening, which is that initial recognition, and then we have a process that awakening undergoes. And all the hardcore Neo-Advaita people, they're gonna focus on that absolute reality. And that's really a lotus stone or a portal, even, I could say, to walk through that eye of the needle. To walk through that eye of the needle or to begin that deconstruction. And the reason that I've really enjoyed making a lot of this content in the past few years is because as I've gone through these processes, I've been able to describe them, which when they, started, I had no clue what the heck was going on. So now it's just an extremely rewarding opportunity for me to be able to share some of these phases that occur in this process, or this awakening process. So one of those phases that I want to talk about today is dissolution or composting. So the death of the ego. The death of the ego is not that initial waking up period when consciousness starts to disidentify from all the aspects of itself that are limited in reality. It's a little bit deeper than that. It's actually when it starts to dissolve them. So when awareness starts to, like the lens of awareness, when it starts to focus on a formation, so an ego pattern, like a trauma or a shadow aspect, for example, what happens to it is that it weakens it, or it makes it, the energy charging it stops. So it loosens its grip on playing out that pattern and playing out that role. And for the person and the personal I, that still, the consciousness could be still coming in and out of that total identity. What it's doing is it's witnessing its own death. So it's a pretty horrifying process, and it's a pretty frightening process that requires a lot of internal reflection, a lot of, more of these feminine qualities of surrendering and nurturing. And just kind of allowing also the qualities of water, really. But in an integration period or in an embodiment period, when awareness starts to push out into life like that, meaning that the ego is actually starting to dissolve, and it's, again, sequential for most people, and I do not know if there's an end to this. I don't know how deep these patterns are in general once you start working on more transpersonal patterns that aren't necessarily limited to memory or to traumas that the body experienced in this particular incarnation. So I don't know how deep that goes, and I don't know how eternal that process of evolution is. I'm going to guess that it's infinite, and that as long as there's a physical dense makeup here, meaning the body, that it's going to just release for the rest of its life. That's what I'm thinking happens. Whether or not I'm right, I don't know, don't care. It's not really of any interest to me, to be honest. So this integration period, or this embodiment period, it has this quality to it called dissolution or decay. It's the period of death. You can feel it on a physical level. You will literally encounter sensations of dying, really bad death anxiety. You can have very just dark emotions. You can fall into depressive episodes. You can have simply the personality's just losing interest in life as it once knew it, right? So it has no real momentum to go achieve things. It has no real drive or will. It's not able to make money in the ways that it used to. It's not able to maintain relationships in the way that it's used to. And it kind of goes into this holding pattern that, again, I call a process of decay. And decay is a very cool thing if you really look at it, because I'll give you the example of back in my home, back in Eastern Europe, we had a huge garden. It's not alive anymore. It's gone. After my grandfather passed, it just, wasn't a thing anymore for my grandma to upkeep on her own. But I remember to this day, there was a huge compost in the back of the garden, like right against the forest. So, maybe the animals were coming over there to munch on, rotting apples or rotting lettuce or whatever. But time and time again, I remember, whatever leftovers were at the dining table, I was always asked to go meander over there and throw them into the compost. Then what happened with that compost? Then my grandparents would use it to fertilize all the, potatoes, the plum tree, the carrots, the tomatoes, and whatever else. So that compost eventually became, the matter created energy. It created nutrients, and it created nourishment for new growth, for new life, new plants, and eventually, food. So the spiritual composting process is really no different. So when these old patterns, and actually the ego itself is collapsing in on itself, it feels like a very dark period and a very deep death cycle. And it's actually an absolutely perfect time to do shadow work and to go really deep within the unconscious. And actually that's what that process is for. So I've been really dealing with that for on and off for quite a bit of years. But what catapulted me into basically, I guess, making shadow work super easy, super digestible, and super pleasant are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or actually 5 books that I'm going to share with you, because I did not work with a therapist. I did work with some energy healers, thankfully. And most of these things I had to figure out on my own. So in order, I'm going to give you the books that I attribute to basically assisting me with this embodiment integration period that consciousness had gone through. And then I'll link up in the video where you could get these as well. But the first one is Man and His Symbols by Carl Jung. I believe this was the last book that Jung wrote, and his intention with this book was to create a manual for the everyday average person to be able to understand the structure of the psyche. And Jung is the father, in my opinion, and also I think in general, of shadow work. Okay. He and Freud were super big into the unconscious, but they kind of parted ways when Jung started going into a little bit more of a mystical part of the psyche and touching upon something that he called the collective unconscious. So the collective unconscious to him was a shared pattern of thinking that arrived in the form of archetypal imagery. So Man and His Symbols, basically the symbols are, he says that we actually think in symbols, we think in images. So when we're playing out the role of a daughter or of a mother, of a writer, of an emperor, of a warrior, of a spiritual wise man, of a monk, of a athlete, of any persona, we're actually acting out a collective patterning, and the thinking and emotional realm that comes along with that. Most of these patterns are established very early on in childhood, and then they get embedded into the personality. So this book will kind of go into the structure of the psyche and will help you better understand the different ways that information psychically is organized in perception or in awareness. Definitely 100% start with this book before you go on to any of the other ones. And yeah, so that's that. Next, I'm going to go into The Spiritual Dimension of the Enneagram by Sandra Maitri. Enneagram basically is, all that means is personality type. And this author basically says that we use the personality, we create a personality as a coping mechanism to deal with our separateness. So she describes 9 predominant personality types in this book, and describes kind of their core wounding or the core holes that these personality types have that they are trying to compensate with these personality type behaviors. Very cool book. One thing this book really did for me that I thought was neat is that it really took out the charge of judgment that I had with certain people, certain personalities in my life that I consider to be a certain way. This book really just helped me realize how impersonal that these people's behaviors really were. And it's amazing how accurate these personality types are. Like, at first I was like, no, I'm not that into like categorizing people and putting them into like a little box, but I thought it was so extremely accurate. I could find multiple people that I knew that fit each one of the different personality types that she describes. So the reason this book is cool is because when you're dealing with archetypes, again, you're dealing with personality patterns. What does this have to do with shadow work? Well, quite a bit actually, because all this is happening in an unconscious realm. In other words, it's happening in the shadow. These behaviors are automatic and they're coming from places that are not yet conscious. They're becoming conscious, but these are tools, these books are suggestions as to how you can perceive some of these destructive, separate-based dynamics that seem to have a hold on you that doesn't really let you move forward to this freedom that's been recognized, and continue sucking you back into bondage, into suffering, and into really old, outdated patterns. Because the problem here is that if we don't look at these things, if we don't see them for what they truly are, they're going to keep having that repetitive way of coming back up and attempting to be seen, right? Because they all just want to be seen. They all just want to come into the light. They all just want to be integrated. So next, when we've acknowledged that these things are real in terms of, relativity, we can start working on them in a therapeutic manner. Once you have detected within yourself maybe a couple core archetypal patterns, you can start to actually dialogue with them or distinguish the different power dynamics that they have with one another in your thinking patterns. And for me, the way this started coming out and revealing itself was really just noticing triggers, noticing where I was still playing certain roles in order to stay safe, in order to receive love, approval, acceptance, or meet certain needs, superficial needs, like my need to have more fun, my need to have more freedom or whatever, but not in a way that's pure and liberated from the realm of time and space, but more dependent on certain people doing certain things, saying certain things, life panning out a certain way. So you can kind of start to detect which core archetypes are playing out in your life, and you'll break them out. You'll be able to break them out after just reading these two books. You'll be able to break out the ones that are conscious, meaning the ones that you're aware of, and then ones that perhaps you aren't yet aware of or don't really recognize where they're coming from or what their needs are. Like, for example, a big one for a lot of people is the inner child. The inner child. For me, another one was party girl, which was an archetype that kept coming up over and over again, an archetype that really wanted to have fun in like a bad way. And for other people, it might be the workaholic. These are repressed aspects of the psyche. They're also called the shadow aspects, okay? Such a famous book. I know so many of you know it. I know a lot of you have studied this guy's work, but I'm sticking him in because he's amazing. Dick Schwartz, Internal Family Systems Therapy. Another book that he wrote, or actually no, he didn't write, I think a student of his wrote, that's on Kindle, and it's a lot less wordy, is I think No Bad Parts. So you can kind of choose. If you don't want to read too much and you're not into the whole clinical stuff, check out No Bad Parts. I know they have illustrations and diagrams, and it's a little easier to read. But this is an actual therapeutic method that I did on myself with my journal, because I wasn't working with a therapist. I didn't really have a friend I could go through some of this with. I kind of did, but I just was going a lot deeper, and I was spending a lot of time on this stuff. So this handbook really helped me understand what the relationships of all these different archetypes were. How did party girl relate to the inner child, or the health nut, or the, whatever. What are the dynamics between these different parts? How do they rely on one another to meet their needs? Where are their needs not getting met? And how is that impacting their behaviors? Okay. A supplementary book to that book is, these guys were big in the 60s, I think. Helen Cedra Stone, Embracing Ourselves. So this was a husband and wife couple that really pioneered voice dialogue. And this is a method of speaking to our different parts, or archetypal energies, or also known as thinking patterns, by actually embodying them and coming to become them. So they would have their patients or their clients sit in a chair across from them, and they would talk to the part that was having an issue. And a lot of times, like, this is what I thought was really interesting in this book. What they point out here is that a lot of these parts, when they're playing out, meaning when they're activated for whatever survival reason they're activated, they'll actually come with psychosomatic issues. So like they would notice that if their clients, if one of their clients' part would come out consistently, it would also always suddenly trigger a headache or a stomach ache or a backache or some sort of ailment. And so resolving the issues that these parts were having quite often would also resolve the ailment that the part came with. So super mind-blowing, cool stuff. Another guy that's really big on that kind of stuff right now, what's his name? Gabor Mate. I know he just released a book. I think it's called The Myth of Normal. And that book talks about basically how almost all physical health problems come directly from trauma, because a lot of these parts actually originate from trauma. And trauma is simply a system's inability to deal with the stressor at any given time, right? So we all have that. Okay, here we go. Right now, currently, my all-time #1 favorite book. I'm using these methods right now with people who are working one-on-one with me. I'm using them on myself. If you get this book, you can just learn the techniques and do them on your own self. But this is called Focusing by Eugene Gendlin. And this fellow, he was also a clinical psychologist, and he really noticed that people could not fully resolve trauma without going into the physical embodiment of it. So this means that, when they were going into their therapist's office and going on in the session about the trauma, and then doing techniques that were just psychoanalysis, things just weren't resolving. People actually had to go into the physical living embodiment of the trauma itself, listen to it, and allow it to express itself. So this is a technique. Focusing is a 6-step technique, which I will actually read you right now, because that gives you something you can implement immediately. Is Okay, so step 1 would be clearing a space. So that just means, making some room in you. So like when we sit quietly together, that's one way we clear space. Finding a felt sense. Okay, this means detecting what a given trigger or inflammatory marker in an environment is. Maybe it's just a recent argument you had, some icky feeling that won't go away, some stressor that keeps coming up. Finding the felt sense of that, meaning sensing it in general, that it's there, acknowledging it. Getting a handle is step 3. So that just means kind of like finding what that is. What are you? What is this tightness in my belly? Right? Is it fear? Is it nausea? Does it feel like knives? Does it feel like an open field of flowers? What is it? Step 4, resonating. So resonating is really just going back and forth between the image or the word that's being created with that physical sense, and then just kind of hanging out in between each and every one of those images and sensations, just making contact with both together. Step number 5, asking what is the problem, what does it need, and allowing the sensation, the physical tightness in the throat or heaviness in the head, to speak energetically and tell you what it is and what it needs. Okay? And last but not least, receive. This means to welcome what comes up, okay? To hear what is being said, right? A gift is being given to you, and it's up to you to accept it. And a lot of times I basically find these patterns just immediately resolving, or at least resolving in the next day or two. So, worthy of your attention and your time, guys, truly. And I haven't read this one yet, but I'm going to read it next. There's so much I want to read next, but Jung, the archetypes and the collective unconscious. I'm going to guess that this will be a heavy hitter and things I'm interested in. Maybe you've already read it. If you have, let me know what you thought about it. And, I know. How about I just open to a page and read it before we say goodbye? For the works of mortals on earth are like branches. Nothing has but one fate in mind, but all things revolve in a circle. Nor is it lawful to abide in one place, but each keeps its own course wherewith it began. Trying to figure out where this is from. Writings of Clement of Alexandria. The symbolical significance of circles. So, yeah. Anyhow, so I hope this is useful and helpful to you. Let's just take a moment of silence, please, before we say our goodbyes and see if anything else comes up. Really good to see everybody. Take good care.